And what we're dealing with here, the title of the paper is Pittsburgh's Forgotten Tragedy, the Dorothy Albert Case. And one of the things that I deal with is McCarthyism and security issues. Also, another thing I also did was healthcare delivery. It's a very long story, but in McCarthyism in the Suburbs, Alison Hepler relates the story of Mary Knowles, a children's librarian who was harassed by the federal government for having been a communist. Ironically, the government's goal was very similar to what the Soviets did to anyone who violated their political orthodoxy: turn the offender into an unperson. Such an individual was demonized as a traitor to the nation, subjected to loss of livelihood, professional standing, and social status, thereby becoming a pariah to be shunned. In a number of ways, the Knowles case, in its broad outlines, resembles that of Miss Dorothy Albert, a teacher of some 18 years standing who taught at Taylor Alderdice High School in Pittsburgh. Like Knowles, Miss Albert's accuser was a former FBI paid informant who, after leaving the Bureau's employ, sought to monetize his association with it. In the Knowles case, the accuser was Herbert A. Philbrick, who wrote a book about his alleged exploits entitled I Led 3 Lives. This was later turned into a weekly television series under the same title that ran for 3 seasons. In Albert's case, the accuser was Matt Svedek. Like Philbrick, Svedek's story and legend was aided by popular media. First, there was a series of stories that appeared in the Saturday Evening Post by Pete Martin entitled, I Posed as a Communist for the FBI. This was followed by a Warner Brothers feature film, as well as a radio dramatic series entitled, I Was a Communist for the FBI. Actor Dana Andrews played Svedek in both. As things turned out, there currently isn't much anything available about the FBI's attitude about Philbrick, since his FBI headquarters file has never been released. The same cannot be said about Svedek, however. The Bureau's disgust with Svedek is palpable when one reads the file. This includes his behavior both during his service and after he left. In fact, the situation was so bad that Director J. Edgar Hoover made a pointed statement that he did not want the Bureau playing any part in Svedek's promotion. With this, the Bureau offered no cooperation in either the film or the radio show. Despite this, the Knowles and Albert cases ended very differently. Whereas Knowles managed to survive the anti-communist hysteria of the period, Albert did not. Named as a communist by Matt Svedek when he testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee on February 12, 1950, Dorothy Albert was dismissed from her teaching position shortly thereafter. Although she appealed the decision to the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, the Third Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, and to the Pennsylvania Superintendent of Education, her efforts to gain reinstatement were met with a flat refusal. Without realizing it, what Albert came up against was not simple anti-communism, but a perfect storm of attitudes, prejudices, and anxieties that inevitably led down a path of injustice. It is interesting to note that immediately prior to Ronald Reagan's ascending the presidency, a discussion took place in the pages of The Nation over who persecuted leftists more viciously, right-wing reactionaries or anti-communist liberals. This is a vital issue in the Albert case, since 2 of our most vehement adversaries were liberal jurists, Judge Henry Ellenbogen and Michael A. Musmano. However, in this instance, it appears that these 2 men, both of them very different, Ellenbogen being more cerebral, and Musmano given to emotionalism, may have felt a certain vulnerability that colored their thinking, leading the case to its tragic outcome. This paper covers the Albert case from that perspective. Now, thing to note that I don't know if I make it clear in the text or not. It is still an open question as to whether or not Dorothy Albert actually was a communist. The issue here was the fact that she had joined what was considered a, quote, communist front organization, and it certainly was. In this case, the Civil Rights Congress. But there is no evidence to date has been presented indicating that she was actually a member of the CPUSA, or Communist Party of the United States of America, whereas whereas Mary Knowles was and had been at one time an actual communist. So this then is the great irony here. Knowles survives it, but Albert goes to ruin. Now, her background was this. Dorothy Albert was the child of Russian Jewish immigrant parents who had moved to Pittsburgh. She had done very well in school. She graduated from Shenley High School. And a very good book about Shenley High School and its ethos was published just a few years ago, entitled The Shenley Experiment. And the thing about Shenley High School was that it was the first comprehensive sort of school of its type, in that students who were on the vocational track and those who were on the college track shared a common curriculum and were educated in the same building. Plus, there was an ethos to Shenley that was summed up in its model: enter to learn, go forth to serve. And so this is what she did. Now, Miss Albert graduated from Shenley in 1924. She graduated from Pitt in 1928, attended and graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, and eventually entered the teaching profession. She had also entered the Pitt Graduate School and had earned 12 credits towards an advanced degree. Now, eventually, she did end up earning that advanced degree at Middlebury College, taking a Master's of Arts in French Language and Literature. Now, which she completed in 1937. Now, the thing was, when she started her teaching career, we talk about her being a teacher for some 18 years. In fact, she was a teacher for 20. The 18 years is that she was a permanent tenured teacher at Taylor Alderdice High School for those 18 years. The two previous ones, she taught 1 year at Shenley High School and then another year at Taylor Alderdice. Now, the thing was that she was highly regarded as a teacher. Her evaluations were always very good. About the only sour note that was ever sounded was that one of her principals said that she had something of a hard time maintaining class discipline, and that she maybe needed to take a greater interest in her students. Now, she taught English, but she also taught French and Latin, and as I said, earned a master's degree in French language and literature. So all was going well. Now, she will join the Civil Rights Congress in the late 1940s, and this was due to a case where a case that was an example of the sort of, how should I say, racial caste system that Jim Crow society imposed. And it was a case, I believe, that happened in Georgia, where a drunk farmer attempted to rape an African-American woman and her two children, ages 18 and 13, fought back and inadvertently killed the man. Now, what will happen is that in response, the two teenagers are tried, convicted, and sentenced to die in the electric chair, whereas their mother was sentenced to a long term for simple assault. This comes out in the news, and Miss Albert is anxious to do something, and she joined the Civil Rights Congress for that purpose, even though the Civil Rights Congress, or CRC, was a communist front organization. Now, what will happen is this, that in February 1950, February 12th, a man who had been ostensibly a communist, Matt Svedek, comes forward and comes out into the open as having been an FBI plant within the Communist Party, and he testifies before the House Un-American Activities Committee. This testimony had been arranged by a local Pittsburgh group known as the ABC, Americans Battling Communism, and so Svedek comes and gives his testimony, and he names, I'd say, in about 3 figures of supposed communist affiliated individuals working within southwestern Pennsylvania. He names Dorothy Albert as one of these individuals on March 13th. So this is the thing to understand. Number one, the only evidence that was ever presented about Miss Albert having any sort of communist affiliation was based on Svedek's say-so. Nobody ever produced a party card, nothing like that. The second thing is this: Svedek, although he was hailed as a hero, was, if you will, an individual whose relationship with the truth was fraught. First and foremost, Svedek had psychological problems, and even the FBI commented about this. There's an FBI internal memo that describes Svedek. We would use the term today as someone suffering from bipolar disorder, although they didn't use the clinical term of the time, manic depressive. The agent or the handler involved said that this man alternates between periods of high enthusiasm and deep depression, that he's moody and he's given to self-pity. The second thing is that Svedek was an alcoholic. Now, this was kept all from public view, and what ultimately caused his leaving the FBI was that he was dismissed. He lived in I think, the William Penn Hotel. He had a lady guest up to his room. He got drunk, and then he gave her a wild story about being a FBI counter-spy and an undercover agent in the Communist Party. And at one point, he threatens to shoot her in the head. Now, Svedek had engaged in other antics along the way prior to this time, and finally the FBI said, enough is enough, this guy's got to go. So he ends he leaves the Bureau roughly around January 15th or thereabouts, 1950. And within a month's time, he is testifying and he's hailed as a hero. Now, a few years later, an article was written entitled The Kept Witnesses by Richard Rove. And with this, Svedek was one of these professional witnesses. And Svedek, more or less, is paid whenever he testifies. And in another book entitled Perjury by another former phony communist that the FBI had planted by the name of Matuso, he says that many of these people lied, including Svedek, and that Svedek admitted it as much. Now, so this is what you're dealing with. So this woman's career is hanging in the balance courtesy of this guy. Now, she will be interviewed the day after Svedek names her by the superintendent of public education in Pittsburgh, Earl Dimmick, and in a very interesting conversation, which is, they do record this in the record, Dimmick asks her if her parents were American-born or foreign-born. She says they were foreign-born. And he makes the comment, I wonder why it is that so many children of foreign-born parents are attracted to and join subversive organizations. Now, this shows his having a considerable prejudice on his part. Now, and another rendering of that record, of that story.
Wrap up, please, when you get a chance.
Okay. Long story short, what will happen is that the two judges who end up judging Albert harshly were themselves either immigrants or child of immigrants. Masmano was the son of Italian immigrants. Ellen Bogan was Viennese Jewish and had immigrated from Vienna himself. And both of them had been leftists, and then all of a sudden, it becomes inconvenient for them to be so. And as a result, they end up condemning Albert. Now, I can't, in the time allotted, I can't do justice to the argument that I'm making here, but basically what it comes down to is this, that Albert was sort of a scapegoat as a result of a combination of mendacity, fear, prejudice, and the like, all right? And that these guys come down hard on her, more or less to show that they are good Americans and not soft on communism. And that it also shows that anti-communist liberals were just as bad as right-wing reactionaries against accused communists, and quite possibly even worse. All right, so that's where I wrap it up. What I hope to do is I'm going to footnote this and eventually submit this to the Marshall Digital Scholar so that if anybody's interested, they can download it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Richard. We can take a couple of questions maybe now, like one or two. If you want to use the raise hand or if you just want to unmute and ask.
Hi.
Sure.
This is Marco. I was amazed how many foreign-born children were attracted by the communist activity in just one rather small areas, communist activities. But how did you collect those materials or information for this?
Okay, well, the materials that I managed to secure, number one, Albert's file is at the Pitt Archives. Dorothy Albert's file is at the Pitt Archives. And I also managed to get information from, they have the papers of the lawyer who represented him, Heman Schlesinger. His papers and his, if you're familiar with the historian Arthur Schlesinger, just Heman Schlesinger's name is spelled the same way, only with one S rather than two. And I was able to get a brief that he presented. There's also a transcript of a administrative hearing, but that doesn't seem to, that Albert had, but that doesn't seem to be available, but I'm looking for it. Other materials that I gathered also came from other cases where the Albert case came up in transcripts and so on. So, but yeah, even by the standard of 1950, Dr. Dimick's comment about the children of foreign-born parents was incredibly arrogant and incredibly bigoted. And in another rendering, Albert protested. You see, in Dimick's record, he just says, he brings it up matter-of-factly in conversation. And in a brief that Mr. Schlesinger filed in her defense, said that she went up one side of Dimick and down the other, saying, you have no business bringing that up, Jack. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Wow, this is amazing. Thank you.
Very, very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. We have our next presenter. Actually, she's already on screen. So Maako is our next presenter. If you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Sure.
And if you're not currently presenting, please make sure your video is off and your audio is off so we can give Maako our full attention.
Okay. Give me a second to share my screen.
Sure. Great.
Oh, sorry.
That looks great. Thank you, Maako.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. I'm Maako Shiratori. I'm a master's student at Appalachian State University. Then I'll start my presentation of dialogic imagination in Ray and Jackal hunting and Appalachian folktale beyond racial heritage. This paper analyzes a jacktail told by Ray Hicks, a storyteller from Beech Mountain in western North Carolina in 1969. The study attempts to examine how the story could challenge racial stereotypes. The map on the right side shows Beech Mountain in western North Carolina. It's on the border of Abilene and Watauga counties. Beech Mountain is a part of the Appalachian region in the left map. The region covers multiple states following the spine of the Appalachian Mountains. Ray Hicks told stories for more than 20 years at the Jonesboro National Storytelling Festival until 1997. He was featured as a lead storyteller at the first festival in 1973. His ancestors came from England and Germany in the late 18th century, and Hicks' family had many active bearers of Appalachian folklore. Ray Hicks also traces his Cherokee heritage to his great-grandmother. Since the end of the Civil War, previous American folklore studies have long considered Appalachian folktales and ballads as the old cultural heritage of Americans whose ancestors came from Europe. Early folklorists, for example, Cecil Shaw and Richard Chase, excluded Black or Native Americans in the category of Americans. Even around 1970, at the end of the folk revival, national popular musicians regarded people in Appalachia as the origins of American folks and romanticized the region. The stereotypes of Appalachian cultures as the ancient forgotten white people have survived until now. Scholars have picked up Hicks as a prototype of the mountain storytellers or an Appalachian icon who preserves the English of Elizabethan times and the pioneer spirits of white Americans. On the other hand, to disconnect Appalachia from its stereotypes, Appalachian studies, interdisciplinary area studies formed in the late 1970s. These scholars reveal diversity and contradictions within the nation, within the mountains. Scholars of the Hicks folktales came to see the artistic originalities and the supposedly unique cultures of Western North Carolina. These scholarly arguments, however, still have two problems. First, the discussions excluded the Hicks relations with Native Americans and African Americans. Second, they emphasized how the Hicks family transcended or altered their traditions. This emphasis confined themselves to chronological studies. The limited perspective silenced the participants' experiences and also the voice of Native Americans and African Americans. Among these problems, this presentation focuses on the invisibility of Native and African Americans. As the time is limited, I will not review participants' experiences such as dialogic imagination in the performance space between Ray and his listeners. Previous studies categorize jug tales as an American variation of European Martian. Martian means magic tales or fairy tales in folklore studies. Folklorist Carl Lindell points out that jug tales usually share characteristics of European Martian as follows. First, transformation of a protagonist makes the plot center. A hero leaves home because he or she lacks something, overcomes obstacles, eventually comes back with satisfaction of his or her needs. Second, powerful antagonist appears in the story. Signs such as once upon a time or they lived happily ever after set the story in a timeless world, divided from the actual life. The tale lacks specifications of places or characters. The teller omits detailed portrayals of each scene. These features embrace the connection between jug tales and European heritage. This paper will examine how Ray Hicks's jug tale moves beyond the traditional characteristics of Martian. As an example of jug tale, my research looks at a tale called Ray and Jack Go Hunting, recorded in 1969. In this tale, Ray and Jack go hunting together, encounter miracles and adventures with animals in the forest, and return home with huge hunts. The story begins like this. Quote, "This here is one about where I went down one fall. It was Indian summer. I went down to Jack's, and he was fixing to go hunting. And I said, 'Jack, do you care if I was to go along?' He said, 'No, Ray.' So I had a dinner with me, a can of pork and beans, and had picked out a little snack. So we went on and got in the woods." Unquote. This beginning mentions Jack, which is a key word to signal the story as a jug tale. However, it has inconsistencies with the first and third characteristics of Martian. As the first feature, the transformation of the hero, usually Martian explain that a protagonist initially lacks something, which motivates him to leave home. However, in Ray and Jack Go Hunting, Ray eats pork and beans, and Jack fixes a little snack before their departure. Therefore, listeners would not imagine Ray and Jack's emergent needs for hunting. In other words, Ray and Jack Go Hunting shows the absence of the protagonist's initial lack or dissatisfaction. Additionally, about the third characteristics of Martian, which sets the story in an eternal world, Ray and Jack Go Hunting has the storyteller himself as one of the protagonists. Ray asks, "Jack, do you care if I was to go along?" And he socializes with Jack. The teller in real life enters the world of the story. The narrative blurs the boundary between the story world and reality. Therefore, the appearance of Ray as a character differentiates the tale from the Martian traditions. Hence, the first part of Ray and Jack go hunting provides exceptional features as an European Martian. Other parts of this tale, in terms of the story settings, characterizations, and structure, are also exceptional. In looking at the story setting, the third characteristics of Martian confirm that the stories usually omit detailed illustrations of each scene, and the tales are set in an eternal world separated from daily life. For example, a variant of Ray and Jack go hunting published by Richard Chase, an early vocalist, goes as follows. Quote, back in old times, there was plenty of good game back on these mountains here, and one time Jack, unquote. Quote again. Now, boys, don't ask me too much about where it was Jack and me went hunting that day. It was pretty far back when I was a young feller, and I can't remember exactly which way we went nor which part of which mountain that was in, unquote. Usually, Martians are set in an eternal world that is different from daily life. In this tale, Ray's performance lacks these signs to divide the story from the present. Ray says, and about 5 years after that we took another little hunt, or, and for the last few years I went a hunting with Jack, as if he had the adventure recently. Also, the first hunting episode of Ray and Jack go hunting exemplifies the detailed narratives Ray provides. Quote, Ray, he said, by that's honey, that's honey. I said, yes. He said, yeah, that's honey. So we went on up to the head of that holler, and it was a big tree and cracked open. The bees had swarmed from one swarm and had got in there at the start, then had kept swarming from limb to limb on up to tree till it was just a whole tree of honey, unquote. Ray reports the scene as if he was actually watching the bees moving from a limb to another limb. In a different episode, Ray portrays the lively motions of ducks as well. Quote, and he tied his breeches legs so he could swim better and swim in under there and tie the legs of the ducks together. When he come out amongst them, they was all tangled up and sick a quacking you never heard. He was standing there looking them, getting ready to get him out, and did give out. I see something jumping in his breeches. I said, Jack, what's in your breeches? He untied his breeches and had 35 pounds of fish, unquote. When Jack catches ducks at once, Ray says they were a quacking you never heard. As this is the only part where Ray directly calls listeners you, the narration emphasizes the voice of the ducks. Moreover, when Ray says he was standing there looking at them, getting ready to get in out and they give out, audiences would imagine the detailed process of capturing the ducks as if they were listening to the live reports at the sport. These examples illustrate that Ray and Jack go hunting tells details so that listeners can virtually enjoy the supernatural adventures like their own experiences in their daily life. Therefore, the story differs from the traditional Martian, which sets the story in a remote world away from everyday reality. Next, I will examine characters in Ray and Jack go hunting. Martian normally feature a strong and evil antagonist. My analysis focuses on the lack of evil in this tale. Here, only Ray, Jack, and animals appear as characters. The protagonists, Ray and Jack, help each other and fight with the animals. Therefore, audiences might easily fall into the misconception that animals fulfill the role of the antagonist. For example, vocalist Alan Lomax assumes a snake in a story is evil. He comments that conquering the poisonous native snake represents the frontier spirits of white Appalachian people. However, this is actually how the snake appears in the story. Quote, when I opened my can of beans, I reached over and stuck my knife in a log. Just a second after that, I looked at Jack, and it looked like the stump was carrying him off. And I said, Jack, is that stump lighting you off? He said, no, but that, Ray, it ain't moving, I don't think. And about that time, it comes sapling at us, and I see that I was the one that was moving. And be gone, I wasn't sitting on a big black snake. When I'd stopped my knife in what I thought was a log, it hurt it and put it a crawling, unquote. This narration tells a funny story that Ray stabs his knife into the snake, mistaking it for a stump. However, the teller does not say that the snake has poison, nor that the animal attacks Ray. Rather, he mentions the pain of the snake by saying, "It hurt it and put it a crawling." The narrator explains the reasonability of the snake's action. Thus, listeners should not necessarily take the snake as evil. Some Cherokee myths share a similar way of depicting snakes. For instance, two Cherokee stories called Getting Fire and How the Snake Captured Fire have a big black snake. But the serpent has no poison. Another Cherokee tale, Uktena, says that a snake god called Uktena has poison, but that it also brings medicine to cure any kind of disease. Ray Hicks liked visiting his Cherokee neighbors to listen to their stories, and he was proud of his ecological knowledge of animals and plants as a heritage of his Cherokee great-grandmother. Both Cherokee tales and Ray and Jack hunting a boy representing the snake as merely an evil figure. Therefore, listeners can say that this hunting tale lacks strong antagonists, which differs from the Martian tradition. In Martian, the transformation of the antagonist from his lack to satisfaction makes the center of the plot. Therefore, it is useful to examine how the heroes, Ray and Jack, change through the stories. In terms of the transformation, I've already discussed the absence of the protagonist's initial lack or needs at the story's beginning. Here is the tale's ending. Quote, "He loaded them up and took them on in, so I went back down there and eat with him a while, eating out that meat. And about 5 years after that we took another little hunt, got in the woods and was hungry, and there was a peach tree I set off in the woods, and I said, 'Jack, yonder's a peach tree,'" unquote. This last part of Ray and Jack go hunting tells that Ray and Jack eat up all the hunts, and they go hunting again about 5 years later. Protagonists of Martian usually have the imperishable satisfaction by getting a fortune or a wife, which suggests the end of the adventure. On the contrary, in this tale, the satisfaction of Ray and Jack is comparatively short-term. Ray continues to go hunting. The tale has a linear change of the hero's situation as he gets the rewards of a number of hunts. However, the story lacks the inherent transformation of the hero from lack to satisfaction.
Marco, if you can wrap up in about a minute, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I skipped some parts. My further study will examine the possibility that Jack tales which folklorists consider as part of white Appalachian heritage may have connections with other ethnic groups. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ma'ako. If we have a couple of minutes for maybe a question or two if someone wants to ask. You can either use the raise hand function or you can just unmute. Okay, well, thank you, Ma'ako. I'm very interested in Ray Hicks' work and all of, I'm a linguist, so I'm very interested in all the things that had stars on it and your transcripts. Thank you. Our next presenter has actually pre-recorded the video, so I'm going to be sharing that from my screen. The presenter is Hallie Nip from Marshall University, and the title of the presentation is Everything We Are, A Study of Food in Appalachian Literature. So let me share this. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I need to do something different. I'm sorry. Include system. and you should be seeing this and hearing this. So here we go.
I'm Hallie Knipp from Marshall University. I'm a grad student there, and this is a study called Everything We Are, a study of food and Appalachian literature. As world-renowned chef Anthony Bourdain stated, food is everything we are. Food is something that people identify very closely with their identities. Perhaps this sentiment is why food is such a central part of so much of Appalachian literature. The act of preparing and consuming food and literature is never a simple, meaningless act. Narratives about beans and cornbread are also narratives about class and culture. Poems about convenience stores and fast food restaurants are poems about the potential loss of a culture. This analysis seeks to examine what food symbolizes or represents in contemporary Appalachian novels and poems, and how food and Appalachian culture may be changing, and what that means for the culture, due to changes in agricultural systems and the availability of convenience foods. In Appalachia, food plays a role in nearly all aspects of the culture. It is a symbol of familial bonds, related to sexuality and religion, and symbolizes home. However, as Appalachia becomes more connected with the hegemonic national culture via industrialization, the region's food culture, and by extension, the regional culture at large, has become endangered, as showcased in contemporary literary works. Jeff Mann's Civilization Comes to Summers County mourns the installation of a McDonald's. The poem states, "Our grandparents used to gather ramps and creasy greens, boil down sour gum, canned tomatoes, peppers, chow-chow, beans. Who needs all that now? Against the Alleghenies' October smolder, against the sky's sapphire, chat monstrous, yellow M humps, visible for miles," speaking both to the loss of culinary and agricultural culture and to the loss of idyllic mountain scenery. Erica Abrams Locklear explains, "Man not only celebrates Appalachian food, but he also uses food descriptions to emphasize the importance of the literal mountains that sustain these Appalachian culinary traditions. As Appalachia becomes less othered via industrial advancements and hegemized American culture supported by the internet, our distinct mountain culture feels threatened, as the loss of Appalachian food culture is not the only potentially life-threatening risk to the regional culture." In Appalachia and in Appalachian literature, the food culture is incredibly influential to the family and familial relationships. Risto Miozo, Eric Arnold, and Linda Price explain, "Food meanings and practices contribute to the family identity and domestic life, and food plays a role in the production and negotiation of family and family member identities." As Sarah Skeets writes, "For many people, the connection of food with love centers on the mother, as the mother or mother figure is the literal provider of nourishment." Skeets goes on to say that non-biological mothering is widespread in literature, used both as an indicator of love and nurturing or its lack. For H.F. Sims from Finding H.F., who was raised by her grandmother, home-cooked meals represent both her Meemaw's love for her and the connection she has to her grandmother's home. H.F. states, "I hate milk, but Meemaw makes me drink it." Here, her grandmother literally gives and insists upon 16-year-old H.F. consuming the literal symbol of maternal nourishment. Conversely, the meal H.F. later shares with her biological mother leaves her with no sense of comfort, signaling that Sandra, who has already abandoned her daughter, is both unable to nourish H.F. and is also unable to connect emotionally. So interlinked was the idea of food and family to Robert Netherland that he combined genres to create his cookbook/memoir, Southern Appalachian Farm Cooking, a memoir of food and family, in which he provides recipes, but also insight into the importance of those recipes to his multi-generational farming family. The family element is also prevalent in Jeff Mann's poems. In Homecoming, the speaker has participated in the canning process with his father, his husband, and his sister, an essential Appalachian tradition, while in Yellow Eye Beans, the speaker wonders about his late grandmother as he prepares a traditional Appalachian meal, beans, cornbread, and chow-chow. Both poems represent the nearly hereditary nature of Appalachian food culture, traditions which must be taught and learned, which were at least at one point essential for survival. Finding H.F. Southern Appalachian farm cooking, and man's poetry showcase the importance of Appalachian food in relation to the Appalachian family, and leave one to wonder what the effects of industrialized food practices will be on the Appalachian family unit. Similarly, food is often textually linked to sexuality. Novel culinary experiences are associated with one's emerging sexuality, and consumption is often paired with sexual behavior. This is showcased in HF's inability to consume the meal prepared by her meemaw, while thoughts of being in bed with Wendy fill her mind, a refusal of any sort of edible manifestation or conflation. After HF asks for permission to spend the night at potential love interest Wendy's house, meemaw remembers her own experiences of sleepovers, saying, "We just lay awake in bed together and talk and giggle about the craziest things." HF, not having previously considered the possibility of sleeping in the same bed as Wendy, is slightly overwhelmed as she imagines crawling into the same bed with Wendy, laying beside her, seeing her flaming red hair spread across the pillow. After this realization of possible sexual contact, HF finds herself, for the first time, unable to enjoy meemaw's cooking. Skeets explains that, physically speaking, according to Freud, sexual desire has its roots in and grows directly out of the satisfaction of hunger for food. This may explain why food and sex are so linked culturally, an idea which is present in contemporary Appalachian literature. For HF's part, much of her anxiety surrounding her sleepover at Wendy's stems from unfamiliarity with the possible culinary norms. Her focus becomes not on the possibility of sleeping with Wendy, but eating in her home. Finding HF is not alone in connecting food with sex. In Scissors, Paper, Rock, Raphael has sex with Nick during the hardened fish fry after they slip away from the dinner party and share a joint, another form of consumption. Indeed, one could argue that the entirety of Jeff Mann's Gathering Green Tomatoes in the Rain, ostensibly a poem about cooking fried green tomatoes, is actually a metaphor for a sexual and romantic relationship. The poem opens with the speaker and his lover entangled in bed together on a rainy Sunday morning, the picture of ideal domestic life. Creating this meal together, though not literally sexual in nature, is a stand-in for the sex act as it recreates the closeness, the intimacy of sharing one's body with another. Sharing food in this manner is a similar act. The lines, "All the years before, giving gifts to those who could not care, would not give back. How well we make a feast together. Those years of waste are over," speak not to the literal meal they have created, but the sensual and romantic relationship they have together. The conflation of food and consumption with sexual activity is enduring. In these Appalachian texts specifically, regional foods are the link to sexuality. HF experiences a loss of appetite for meemaw's cooking as she considers sleeping with Wendy, and focuses considerable energy on what she expects will be astonishingly different culinary experiences at Wendy's house. Raphael and Nick's consummation occurs during a traditional Appalachian reunion. Jeff's main choice of metaphor is a fried green tomato, ubiquitous with the Mountain South cuisine. While it's true that food and consumption in general are linked to sexual activity, these instances are uniquely Appalachian in the way they are told. The relation of food and Christianity, or religion in general, in Appalachian literature is ever present. Skeet speaks to the connection of food and religion, saying the crucial centerpiece of Christian worship is a simulated meal, the giving of symbolic bread and wine as a token of love and trust. In a most religious ritual, communicative eating of some sort is prominent. In Appalachia, alongside the Holy Communion, the tradition of church dinners permeates, further pushing this idea of food as being intrinsically connected with Appalachian religion. Cynthia Thayer explains, anytime a meal takes place in literature, it represents something else. Whether it is meant to demonstrate a family dynamic, conflict, or resolution, it always demonstrates a communion. Breaking bread with someone is one of those most intimate acts between two people. Jesus took his last meal with disciples in an act of generosity, love, and devotion. The conflation of religious imagery and food's imagery is scattered throughout Appalachian literature. In Finding HF explains that meemaw likes to sing hymns while she cooks, showcasing meemaw's perhaps unconscious desire to serve God as she serves her family. Again, from Finding HF, the girls in Atlanta are often bribed with the promise of a meal and a bed in order to attend church services by Preacher Dave. Lainey says of Dave, "If we agree to sit through one of his fucking church services, he takes us home with him and feeds us. Usually he lets us shower and sleep there too. His house is huge. It's almost worth going to church just to stay there. Here, food is represented as the reward for participation in religion, as opposed to a way of participating in that religion. Though Dave's church is much different and more accepting than the fire and brimstone theologies HF and Bo are used to, and while Dave and his partner Bill are incredibly inhospitable and kind to the group, there is still something that seems predatory in that transaction. Dave has also found a small apartment and part-time jobs for the girls, but the relationship would not have been formed at all if they had not originally agreed to attend church services. This signals that their ambition and worth, in Dave's eyes, is tied to their willingness to participate in his religion. Food in Appalachian literature is also symbolic of home versus the outside world. As Allison Carey writes, food in Julia Watts's novels is never merely nutrition. The food on the characters' tables represents safety or risk, the known or the unknown. This is certainly true of Watts's Finding HF, but can be applied to several other texts, such as Jeff Mann's poems Gathering Green Tomatoes in the Rain, Yellow-Eyed Beans, and Civilization Comes to Summers County. In Finding HF, food is used as an indicator of HF's comfort level. In her Meemaw's home, with home-cooked Appalachian staples, she's nurtured and secure. As she moves further away from the safety of home, food is also further from her comfort level. The hamburgers she has at Wendy's house are not entirely foreign, and the peanut butter sandwiches she and Bo make on their road trip are certainly familiar, even if they do become rather sick of them eventually. These are examples of food that is familiar, yet still separated from her home. Later, HF will eat Chinese food and shrimp for the first time, saying, "The Chinese food is good and real different than anything I've ever ate before. And I've never ate shrimp before, and it's real good, except it seems weird to be eating a whole animal in one bite." HF's open mind about food is linked to her open mind about her life. While she returns home disappointed about meeting her mother, she returns home changed and matured as well. However, once again, one must pause to consider the cultural diffusion at play in modern Appalachia. Will these foods remain symbolic of home in the outside world? Convenience stores and fast food restaurants offer much of the same choices nationwide, potentially erasing the region's unique food choices. Further, class is largely no longer marked by what one cooks at home, but by whether one has the time to cook for their family at all. As the cost of living increases and the minimum wage remains largely stagnant, more and more Appalachians are working longer hours or multiple jobs, leaving little time for home life. As National Public Radio's All Things Considered reported, employment opportunities in the region are few and far between. In an interview, Virginia native Brad Pennington stated, "I mean, if you got fired tomorrow or quit tomorrow, there's absolutely no opportunity to get another job. You're finding 50 other people on a list a mile long to get a minimum wage job anymore. I mean, you get a job, you keep it because you know you've got to." At the time of the interview, Pennington worked the night shift at a local hotel for $8 an hour and eventually moved on to a call center job for $10.25 an hour. With adults working such low-paying jobs, the need to work more hours presents itself. As such, the local Dollar General's convenient selection of frozen pizza may well have replaced the beans and cornbreads of the past. If so, the food symbolism at play in much of the literature may soon be a moot point. Perhaps the most important food trademark of food in Appalachian literature is its connection to and signaling of Appalachian culture, or in more modern works, the loss of it. Speaking of Jeff Mann's poetry, Locklear states, "Mann's food poems extend beyond praising mountain foods. They stand as a testament to the necessity of such food, both for physical and cultural sustenance." This idea is also prevalent in Netherlands' Southern Appalachian farm cooking, as he explains in detail how each recipe presented relates to his family history and how and when they would prepare such dishes, and points to the changes which are necessary to recreate these recipes in modern kitchens. While food in Appalachian literature generally signals the culture, as Appalachia changes, some worry that both the food culture and the literature which mentions it will change as well. Allison Carey writes, "Will Wendell warnings come true when he writes that the industrial eater is in fact one who does not know that eating is an agricultural act, who no longer knows or imagines the connections between eating and the land, and who is therefore necessarily passive and uncritical, in short, a victim? If so, then the encroachment of processed and fast food will become simply the next act in the long-running drama of the colonization and commercial exploitation of Appalachia. Although food and Appalachian literature, especially Appalachian young adult literature, currently offers an important touchstone for readers, it is possible that role may soon be usurped by the shared childhood diet of Hardee's Biscuits, Pizza Hut Pizza, and the McDonald's drive-thru. What will that usurpation look like, and what will it mean? As outlined here, it could be devastating to nearly all aspects of Appalachian culture. At the very least, it will affect nearly all aspects of natural Appalachian culture. It is clear that food plays a vital role in both Appalachian culture and Appalachian literature. As discussed, regional food practices are a key aspect in Appalachian history, and regional food imagery is present in contemporary literature's representations of the family, sexuality, of religion, and of community. However, much of this imagery hinges on the traditional practices of Appalachian foodways and traditional Appalachian dishes, both of which are at risk. The industrialization of agriculture overtaking the small family farm and the introduction of convenience stores and fast food restaurants, alongside the economic hardship and lack of jobs in the region, have created a perfect storm, one which could very well destroy the culinary traditions of the Mountain South. Because Appalachian foods are so intrinsically linked to other key aspects of Appalachian culture, the loss of their regional food traditions would be devastating to the culture at large. This loss, alongside other factors which threaten the culture of the Mountain South, such as employment deserts and mountaintop removal mining, stands to drastically alter and potentially destroy Appalachian culture forever. And something simply must be done to stop that destruction. Thank you.
Okay, that was the end of that one. Of course, I don't think Hallie is with us to be able to answer any questions, so we're going to move right along to our next presenter. The last presenter in this session is Micah McCrotty, and I'll turn it over to you, Micah.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay. So my paper is The Otherness of Nature, Criticism of Anthropocentrism in Spectre Mountain by Jesse Graves and William Wright. The paper kind of argues that the general structure of the book follows Joseph Campbell's heroic journey, and then I talk some about why they do that later in the paper, but predominantly it's interested in the structure, and then we'll ask the why at the end. So Spectre Mountain functions as a single long story, which follows a persona character known only as the son, nephew, brother, or traveler. Structured similarly to what Joseph Campbell has described as the heroic journey, the book begins with the examination of the speaker's localized world. Jesse Graves and William Wright seek to demonstrate the profound and necessary relationship between humanity and location. The characters in Spectre Mountain fundamentally need the land as a mode of understanding the self, and this tension creates a sense of alienation from placeness for the main character as he journeys to the location of his ancestral home. His journey into the dreamscape of Spectre Mountain emphasizes the paradoxical insights of a deeply rooted local and a temporary visitor as he re-experiences the location as both native and sojourner to the land. People he ultimately discovers in the poem Questions for the Mountain are simply, and I quote, a mite that forms one particle of all refraction. And when placed into the expanse of time, people seem menial. The episodic structure in the book situates this poem as the centermost point from which the traveler begins to reanalyze his own history. All poems prior act as a search for the mountain, and each poem following constitutes his gradual reevaluation of the land through an ecocentric worldview. Here's my thesis. Spectre Mountain seeks to question the adequacy of anthropocentric philosophy to create long-term sustainable connections between ecology and humanity. So first, we'll start with the call. The first signal opens the work by describing the ordinary world of the rural mountain south. The speaker walks among rain-soaked hay bales near the family farm, then visits his frail and aging father, and I quote, "A ghost about to leave the body but clung." The two walked across their homestead and onto another farm to make a campfire where their conversation turns towards the lineage of family and the older man's connection to place. The father expresses concern about his coming death, saying, and I quote, "I cannot transfuse love, trapped in the body and passed down, not to this land or any creek force." Such expression suggests the father fears that his son does not share his sense of camaraderie with the land and instead expresses his disconnect between generation. The following poem, Pulse, describes Campbell's call to adventure stage as the son watches for, and I quote, "a signal, a falling, flaring star." These two poems set up the search for the source of familial influence as an episodic journey. So, stage crossing the first threshold. The journey begins when the traveler comes to what Campbell describes as the limit of the hero's present sphere in the poem Darker Realms, when his mother takes him into, again I quote, "the estate of her dreams." In altered location from the rural scenes found in the first signal, the traveler has now entered the dreamscape of familial memory. Stanzas 3 through 4 affirm that the locations come from a shared recollection between the traveler and his old crone, though her representation comes primarily through memory, while his are obtained through story and faded photographs. The authors write, "I pass through the darker solitudes of the past, like a pilgrim over foreign terrain, eyes open in the murk, but seeing nothing, then eyes closed, seeing only what her voice recalls from times before my life, recreated through tiny forms against the back of my eyelids, relations I have seen before in black and white pictures." Next is, I'm going to skip ahead a bit to the apotheosis of the poem Passage. The final poem in part 2, Passage, is the first recognition of Spectre and contains the first acknowledgement of the mountain as an entity apart from the human world. The opening stanza creates a clear separation between people and the land, arguing that they are trespassers on the land, along with their livestock. This acknowledgement begins the process of recognizing Spectre Mountain as a separate entity from the sun, and the first part then describes a series of Anthropocene visions. Instead of images of mass extinction, however, descriptions of the retaking of human-made structure by wild birds come to the forefront. The, I quote, "new rulers, watchful from solid perches, of a world apart from influence of human commerce, and the natural world begins to reclaim," I quote, "abandoned sheds and barns after the exodus of the population." Plea defines the tone of the second section of Passage, with the third stanza beginning with a direct address to Spectre. "Spectre of the steeps, permit their passage down from your heights." This final stanza also establishes people who are living as outsiders, as people who don't belong to the mountain, and the tone of the plea is generated from a request for amicable separation. It also seems to position the exiters as retreating or defeated by the mountain, and thus underscores the supremacy of Spectre. Peace will only come in a non-specific someplace, a clearer location apart from it. The final stanza further positions the speaker as in communication with the mountain, acting as a kind of priestly role or intermediary. This prayer sets the stage for the poems to follow it, something of a plea of entry then granted by Spectre in the poem Questions for the Mountain. You can see that we've moved kind of quickly over there to number 10 and 11 on Campbell's heroic journey. But yeah, now we've reached the ultimate boon, Campbell's stage of achievement. For the traveler, however, the experience functions as a burning bush did for Moses, which leaves him humbled. In a poem that Robert Morgan described as an Emersonian dialogue in his foreword to the book, the first 4 stanzas of Questions for the Mountain establish the mountain as, I quote, beyond the reckoning, unquote, of the sun's mind, and each of his questions attempt to anthropomorphize the mountain's lived experience. In succession, he relates to the mountain in human seasons, refers to the deciduous leaves and forest fires as garments, and appears to assume the mountain's pain would somehow be relatable to his own. The sun's questions reveal his basic assumption that the mountain's existence in some form or fashion is comparable to human life, and thus experiences reality through a relatable lens. The mountain's response in the 4th stanza dispels the notion of relatability by arguing that it has, I quote, felt a pain beyond your reckoning. This revelation shifts the trajectory of the sun's questions, and stanzas 5 through 8 reflect a new attitude of supplication. The new line of questioning found in stanza 5 through 8 tests the limits of what the mountain has revealed, with each couplet gradually forcing the sun to accept a greater level of ignorance or blindness on his part. The 5th question asks, "What will I see in your creeks in the warmer seasons?" To which the mountain responds by asserting its primacy. "You will see what I allow you to see." Humbled, the sun reframes his question by asking, "What may I witness?" This shift towards humility marks the initial turning point in the poem, and the mountain responds again by claiming he will only find, I quote, "one reading of water, one reading of stone," thus affirming that the sun could only understand limited interpretations of the world around him. By asserting the limitations of humanity, Graves and Wright argue against pure scientism latent in much of eco-critical theory and position the remainder of the poem as a discussion not between equals, but between a finite being and a feature of the landscape which seems transcendent. Stanzas 9 through 14 function as a sequence in which the sun begins to question the extent of the mountain's impact on local life and history in the region. The tenor finds that the local flora, as presented by wild plum trees, grow in response to the shape of Spectre, and that the mountain's, I quote, body cannot be reduced by the removal of stones. Stanzas 9 and 10 suggest the mountain functions as a prime mover, and like Moses, the sun responds with fear and trembling in stanzas 11 and 12. This shift towards nearly deifying Spectre Mountain aids in positioning the individual as temporary within the timeline of physical land, and the sun begins to view the mountain as transcendent. In the final 6 stanzas, the sun questions of the mountain through his new ecocentric lens, repeatedly asking how his own reality and familial history has received direction and course through the interactions with Spectre. Stanza 14 again reiterates the longevity of Spectre by telling the sun that he cannot catch any, and I quote, phantom that moves before him, ultimately ending with a question of how something physical but seemingly permanent, such as Spectre, could relate to the passage of time. "Forever?" asks the sun. "Forever and ever," responds the mountain. This progression from the temporary in stanza 1 to ultimate immutability in the final lines forces the sun and reader to view the mountain through the scope of geologic time. By doing so, Graves and Wright cast doubt on the sustainability of human-centered land ethics and a viewpoint which fails to consider how actions taken in, I quote, "one mite of all refraction," unquote, could cause phantoms to outpace the surviving populace forever and ever. Eventually, the sun begins his return journey, and the poem Alliance is Campbell's The Crossing of the Return Threshold. Connecting Alliance to Questions for the Mountain, this poem synthesizes that work, demonstrating a reanalysis for the traveler from his new knowledge of his place within the world. The mountain reorients the traveler into a proper perspective of time with an emphasis on geologic time instead of human time. This poem then reveals a shift in thinking for him from the compulsion to create cohesive narratives out of the natural world towards an acceptance of the coexistence of seemingly unreconcilable concurrent truths. The world of the mountain is a tale of both, I quote, belief and doubt, where inhabitants can sin and also dream, and I quote, levied down by some ruler beyond the ragged peaks, unquote. Wind works against slate, water against limestone, and The natural allies oppose one another in the end. He discovers it is only in books that the world seems easily comprehensible and square. Existence then is a conflict between multiple competing realities. This brings us to Campbell's stage Master of the Two Worlds, which you can see there is number 16. Oracle Cove is the poem departs from the sun's voice, or else he speaks to the reader directly. The first two stanzas describe the location as otherworldly, as much a language as a locale, outside the reaches of the human tongue, and a natural language, which offers deliverance to the readers and listeners. The third, fourth, and fifth stanza reaffirm the inability of the listener to comprehend the mountain, something which recalls the direct discussion with the mountain in the earlier poem. This culminates into the sixth stanza, which offers a comparison between a child meeting his ancestors with rainwater draining down from ridges into rivers below. Like the gradually strengthening streams, so too does the child see his future by encountering the established streams of his bloodline. All these images then shatter into disorientation, healed only by, and I quote, the immense heart of the mountain by the end of the piece. Like the poems which immediately precede it, Oracle Cove frames the process of self-discovery for the son through a lens of ecological connectivity. He cannot understand the language of the hills, but nevertheless finds himself drawn towards a reappraisal of his family history to include the immense heart of the mountain as just as essential as his forefathers in the creation of his personal identity. So in conclusion here, the final poem, Brother, concludes the work by describing the finitude of humanity. The speaker calls for a brother figure to join him by saying goodbye to a dying world. But this world is the existence of human-centered activity, and the traveler refers to his new understanding with language which recalls the poem Questions for the Mountain, claiming that the land has not yet said all it must say. One syllable of its utterance is slower than 1,000 summers.
Try to wrap up in the next minute or something like that.
Okay. As the final poem in the collection, the final word is beginning, suggests a cyclical nature of the created order and links the first poem, which begins with the word and. The two act as a linkage for the entire book and show the temporary nature of the son's life and familial history and the fragile nature of his newfound understanding of his role within the mountain's world. So that's all I've got. Here's my works cited. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Micah. We have a little bit of time for questions for Micah, and if we want, we can return to any of the other presenters as well. Let's start. If you have questions for Micah, you can either raise your hand or you can just simply unmute and ask. Okay.
I loved all the other presentations today. They've all been really good.
Everything's been great. Does anyone have any questions for any of our presenters? Okay, well, I think then we'll just go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone who presented today, Richard and Micah and Maako, as well as Haley, who couldn't be with us today. I hope you enjoyed this session. Don't forget, there are more sessions starting at 10:30, so chime into those, and everyone take care.
All right, take care, everyone.
Nice meeting everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.